So hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of SustyTalk. Yes, our virtual interview series continues to roll on and provide expert insight on an array of sustainability topics, even as in-person events continue to be introduced or potentially phased out again based on what is going on, and it's quite hard to keep up with what's going on. I'm edie's content editor, Matt Mace, and joining me back into the SustyTalk format is Tracey Herald, Head of Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at Virgin Media O2. So Tracey, I say welcome back to the virtual SustyTalk room, as we called it. We had you on here earlier in the year, and it's fair to say a lot's happened since then. How are you?
Yes, very well, thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's been quite a momentous year, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we spoke kind of late spring, maybe early summer, as part of our countdown to COP26 festival, and we were kind of all looking ahead to this kind of momentous 2 week summit in Glasgow. Strange to think that it's now been and gone, really, and that the dust is starting to settle. That's how quick this year has gone. But I think that's a great place to start this conversation. Is on COP26 and which culminated in the creation of this Glasgow Climate Pact. And while it remains to be seen whether the actual kind of issuances and instructions in the pact will be adhered to and delivered, what were your first impressions of this new, what is essentially a kind of global agreement to kind of push the trajectory of the economy?
Yeah, I think, if we look at the context pre-COP, just as you say, Matt, the climate plans, I think, that had been submitted by nations prior to the conference saw the world on track for 2.4 degrees of warming. And I think while there's a kind of variety of points of analysis, the measures that have been achieved in Glasgow seem to now put us on a trajectory for around, I think, 1.8 degrees. So is the climate pact moving us in the right direction? I'd say yes, absolutely. I think, the question, as you say, absolutely remains about whether the level of urgency and commitment required to keep 1.5 degrees alive, has actually been delivered. I think I saw in another edie interview recently that the interviewee described 1.5 degrees as on life support, which I think seems like a really fair assessment, actually, of the current position. But of course, I think, Matt, where there's life, there's hope. And I think the Glasgow Climate Pact, taken together with the government's net zero plan, alongside really the role of the conference, I think, in, bringing together climate experts and bringing climate change really into the public consciousness like never before, is really creating the conditions to accelerate progress and, help to, I think, hopefully involve many more stakeholders. And I think it's this kind of momentum really that we have to capture and build upon. I think we all share a collective anxiety, don't we, that as we head into 2022, that the focus on climate change is simply going to dissipate. So I think we all have a responsibility really to continue to remind everyone that we have just 2 business cycles left to, this decade to really make it count. And I think that requires action from all of us.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And COP26 felt like this really kind of important moment in the calendar, not just for sustainability professionals, but for the general public. The coverage it got, obviously being in the UK, helped, but it did feel like it was picked up by every kind of national country. That was a real focal point, and I'm really interested to see next year whether it gets that same focal point in Egypt, whether the mainstream media sites will kind of just say, not as interested because it's not in the UK. But I think what that has done is certainly created a stronger narrative around climate action. And obviously it's from a global perspective. It's on policymakers to really kind of introduce mechanisms that will allow us to take 1.5C off of life support and give it a kind of turn it into a thriving movement, basically. But from a sustainable business perspective, were there any aspects of COP26 and the pact that you feel are actually going to likely drive big change amongst the kind of corporate community?
Yeah, I think a really interesting question. I mean, I think in terms of the pact itself, I think it's, identified and influenced some critical levers for change. The phasing out of coal power and reduction in fossil fuel subsidy is absolutely aligned, I think, isn't it, with the broader transition to renewables and supporting businesses really on that journey to net zero. And of course, as a newly merged company ourselves, and in light of the new net zero standard that was launched just pre-COP, we've been now realigning our own net zero pathway. And I'm really certain, I think, actually, that the standard is going to drive greater consistency on goal setting overall. I think similarly, really important to see the ratcheting mechanism and plans for annual review against NDCs and other targets to drive, I think, greater transparency around progress on emissions reduction overall. And I think that point on transparency actually and accountability for emissions reduction will be especially relevant for businesses moving forward. I think, at Virgin Media O2, we intend to continue to maintain that kind of annual reporting cycle against our sustainability goals. But I think there's a bigger question brewing, isn't there, which is that if 2050 is the ultimate horizon for net zero, it'll be really critical to sustain engagement and commitment and accountability for progress over the next 28 years. And of course, linked to this, I think it was really positive to see the focus on climate emissions reporting, which is going to make it easier for experts at a global level to kind of compare progress across nations. And we're, of course, I think, going to see this now flowing into business reporting requirements as the UK government announces the climate mandatory reporting from April of next year. So I think undoubtedly we're going to see greater visibility and accountability moving forward. And I think that's going to be really important, actually, in helping all businesses to step up to the challenges that face us and to make sure that we are all kind of producing plans that are not just kind of notionally taking us towards net zero, but actually demonstrating the progress we're making too.
And this year it was very much COP was always in the horizon. It was always looming on the horizon. Every kind of month it got closer, and every kind of decision, certainly the corporate sphere, seemed to in some way align it. We saw this huge kind of race to zero movement launched technically in 2020, but really take off this year and drive corporate climate action. Now that at least COP26 has been and gone, and obviously the UK is still in its presidency until it hands over to Egypt at COP27. You've already mentioned some of the I suppose, policy instruments that are going to be introduced next year that will have an impact on business. But from as we kind of look to already COP27 in Egypt, what kind of implications do you feel that the heightened focus we've had on climate action from policymakers, from activists as well, that had a really kind of big voice at COP. How do you see that kind of what do you think that kind of level will continue, and will that act as a great way to kind of scrutinize business actions and decisions on climate?
Yeah, I think it absolutely will. I think what was striking about COP26 was that it represented so many parts of society that came together at the same time, really, to tackle the climate crisis. Inside the Blue Zone, you had the incredible work of, national leaders, climate scientists, negotiators, and also, importantly, those with direct and lived experience of climate change who were kind of working together to design solutions. And then again, in the Green Zone, and beyond, actually, you had businesses and civil society organisations sharing the many ways in which they're driving for a kind of fairer and more sustainable world. And even in the city itself, as you've mentioned, the presence of climate activists who had come from really around the world to make their voices heard and remind us how important it is to fight for a fairer, more sustainable future. It's a really kind of powerful overall convening force, I think, that COP represented. And I think it's interesting, really, isn't it? Because while I think that so much was achieved really in that kind of convening spirit of COP, it does also beg the question, who's not at the table, which voices are not being heard. I have a colleague actually who lives in Glasgow, and she confirmed that for many local people that they were simply avoiding the chaos of the city during COP26. And it did give me pause to reflect, I think, on how we must be responsible always for creating more inclusive spaces for, discussion and action on climate change, and ensuring, I suppose, that it's not just considered the preserve of, climate scientists or experts, but a place where everyone can have voice and influence. I think there's certainly, for me anyway, Matt, a real kind of growing opportunity for brands like Virgin Media O2 to be part of supporting those conversations.
Yeah, I think one aspect of COP26 that I was quite happy to see really rise in prominence throughout the kind of well, it was technically 14 days, wasn't it? I suppose rather than 12 days, was this aspect of a just transition, that we can't just decarbonize at the cost of certain parts of society, and that's not just kind of bringing them, almost kind of forcing them along on this journey with us, but actually, making them a part of that conversation, like you said, explaining the opportunities and benefits of that. And I think the transparency stuff that you touched on earlier is shaping up to be a really big year for I suppose just action, isn't it? It is that action. It is that kind of moving that blah 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 to action,
Yes,
which was
yes,
kind
absolutely.
of coined quite a lot during COP. But it was from a journalist's point of view, it was quite easy to see many businesses kind of use COP as this real talking point for them to showcase their sustainability credentials. They very much kind of got senior buy-in for this, whether it was kind of directors kind of speaking about COP in press releases more so than the sustainability professional. Just a few little things like that I noticed, and obviously at COP26 there was a huge business presence anyway. How did businesses now use this momentum that COP has generated to not just kind of, I suppose, move from that blah blah blah? And that's not me saying that businesses haven't been walking the talk on this. Companies like Virgin Media to yourself have a kind of long history of this. But how, if this is the time for action, what steps do businesses take to really step up?
I think there's a really great opportunity here to, move sustainability, I think, much more into the mainstream for business. It goes beyond responsible business. It goes towards reputation, towards trust, and towards sustainable commercial growth too over the longer term. As such, I think, sustainability is absolutely not a fringe activity anymore. And I think part of the challenge for sustainability professionals anyway is how do we meaningfully embed our role in tackling climate change right across our business, not just addressing our own climate impacts, but also thinking about the role of our products and services and our core capabilities, thinking about the influence that we can bring to bear with partners and suppliers. And also, I think just thinking about, as I've said already, the role of our brand in driving awareness and engagement, to make sure that our customers feel part of the conversation. For us, during COP26, young people were a really interesting audience. They're obviously likely to inherit, the very worst effects of the climate crisis, and therefore it's really critical, I think, that we engage them in the debate. And while they're often, just as you said, referred to as this kind of Greta generation, who are perhaps more engaged than any other on the issue of climate, the research that we commissioned with our partners at Global Action Plan showed that while 9 out of 10 Gen Zers really care about climate, only a third are talking about it with their peers. And I think there's a huge amount of worry about, not having the expertise to join the debate on climate change, and this real worry about kind of cancel culture. And for young men in particular, they're much less likely to participate in discussion around climate change. So we partnered with Corrupt FM to deliver a climate change podcast that was setting out to really challenge, I think, some of those myths about, needing to be a climate expert to be involved in the discussion. And I think it's just about, how do we create ways to create a more inclusive movement around climate change overall? And that goes for the role that we play in driving action in our business, the role that we play in empowering our people to feel like they're part of that journey with us too, and that they have a role in helping us take action, but then also how we take that out into communities and to our customers at large. So a really interesting challenge, and I think one that we're only starting to really understand the opportunity or the potential of.
No, it's great to hear how sustainability has evolved. When I started, I think I started just before the Paris Agreement. I started writing about this, and sustainability, and for some organisations it very much still is, but sustainability was very much a siloed function. It had a kind of very small department, and it didn't really have many other touch points with other areas of business. Now it's becoming much more common for it to be embedded, whether that's just through KPIs or just this broader understanding in the boardroom, the finance department, procurement department. Seems much more embedded internally, and now it seems this next frontier seems to be across the value chain with not just suppliers, but with the public that you kind of produce for or provide services for, which is great to see this holistic and just movement of sustainability. So I'm interested to see how that builds into next year. But Tracey, I realise, even though it is the end of the year is winding down, everyone is still extremely busy. So I don't want to keep you for any longer today. But yeah, it does seem like news around climate action is just non-stop at the moment. There's a lot to keep up with, both as 2021 winds down and as 2022 starts up. And for you, the audience, SustyTalk will continue into the new year, and certainly in the build-up of Edie's Sustainability Leaders Forum and Awards, which is taking place in London on the 1st and 2nd of February. There'll be links in the description and on the accompanying article to this video on the Edie website if you'd like more information about what we're doing at our Sustainability Leaders Forum. But until then, do stay safe, do stay positive, have a great Christmas and New Year's, and yeah, going into New Year's, make sure you keep up that Susty Talk.